you all seen on television a track and field event where they finish running this grueling race and all of a sudden they've got this big smile on their face? What's up with that? Are there any runners or joggers here in the room? There's a few, okay. So raise your hand if you've heard of a runner's high. Okay, so a runner's high is this feeling of euphoria that you can get. Say if you run 4 miles, you might have this feeling of euphoria that lasts up to 1 or 2 hours. What's happening, medical research shows that there's oxytocin, serotonin, dopamine is firing in your brain, and it's lowering your blood pressure, and it's making you feel less stressed and more happy. Guess what? I've never had a runner's high. I'm not a runner. But I'm going to share with you today a life hack, a behavioral trick where you can achieve that same euphoria without even exercising. Sounds too good to be true, right? You might not even have to pay for it. You see, what I'm going to talk about is how compassion is the new life hack. And I know because on one of America's darkest days, I was the recipient of compassionate action. On September 11, 2001, my ex-partner Kevin and I were flying from Paris, France into New York City. We were 2 hours out from New York City when the terrorist attacks began. All of a sudden, on our flight over the Atlantic Ocean, there was a sudden drop in elevation and a sharp turn to the north. It looked like we were flying to the North Pole on the GPS map. And suddenly our Air France captain says, due to a terrorist attack, we will be landing in Gander, Newfoundland, and Labrador. I have to be honest, I didn't even ever heard of the place. Didn't know it was part of Canada. But suddenly, after a short 30 minutes, we were on the tarmac, and this picture here is from September 11, 2001. I was on this Air France plane in the upper left, along with 38 transatlantic planes. The small town of Gander, which was next to this airport with a giant runway, they had 38 planes. So the town had 9,000 people, and all of a sudden they had 7,000 unexpected guests. And so what were they going to do with us? You can see their airport's so tiny, you couldn't even get one flight of passengers into the airport. So we sat on our plane for 15 grueling hours, not knowing what was going on in the world. There was no internet back then. We didn't know that the World Trade Center had collapsed. We didn't know the Pentagon was attacked. And so what happened was remarkable and compassionate. The people in the town of Gander decided to open their borders and their community and their homes to 7,000 people from 90 countries. And I, for the first time in my life, I had to rely on the kindness of strangers to give me basic needs: food, clothing, shelter, and information. We couldn't take our luggage off. There was still worry and concern there might be terrorists on some of the other planes. But they took a chance. They had more than and some people might say this story of how they gave us a chance was very kind. They were demonstrating kindness or maybe even empathy. But there's some definitions that you need to be aware of. That empathy might be if the people in Gander gave thoughts and prayers to the people on the planes and maybe sent out some pizza boxes and some water until they reopened U.S. airspace. Little did they know it was going to be 4 days later. But they decided, no, we're going to let everybody, and regardless of their nationality, their religion, their sexual orientation, they said, people need help, you help them. And so they let us in, and they brought us into their communities. And what that is, that's called compassion. Definition of compassion is to engage in the suffering of others. So we were, in a way, suffering, not like the people who were impacted by the attacks, but we were stuck, some people, for 28 hours sitting on the plane. So the next time you want to complain about your flight delay, you can come talk to me. But when the people of this town, when they shut down their schools so that we would have a place to sleep on the floors of the classrooms, and when every stove in this small town was turned on to make food for 7,000 visitors that they weren't expecting, and when they turned their hockey rink and canceled hockey so that they could have a walk-in refrigerator for the donated food, that is compassion. And so it was when I left Gander, and finally my story, it took a long 7 days for me to get home. And so I had just this slight awareness of what happened. And I wanted to pay them back because they had given us free food and paid for our phone calls and gave us free rides. And so on the first anniversary of 9/11, back in Austin, Texas, I owned a company. And I wanted to pay them back, but they said, no, you would do the same. And I wondered, would a small town in America, would they do the same? And I wasn't sure. And so what they were talking about in Gander was called the Golden Rule. And I've learned from the international charity called the Charter for Organization that the Golden Rule is universal to all religions. And even non-religious people can get behind the idea of treat others like you want to be treated. And that's what they were doing in Gander. So on the first anniversary of 9/11, I had a company of 40 people. I closed the doors of my company, and I decided I would send people out in teams of 2 into the community to do random acts of kindness and to go up to strangers and remind them of the 3,000 lives that were lost that day, but also to tell them this brighter story of humanity, that out of the darkness was this light in Newfoundland. And so to make it fun, I added some cash, and I distributed $100 bills to each team of 2 and had them go out into the community to do whatever they wanted to show some compassion and kindness to strangers. So naturally, some people would go buy a coffee, or other people would jump in line and buy someone's lunch, or maybe they would, even pick up the grocery tab. One group actually, they went down to the courthouse and they waited in line and they paid for someone's traffic fines. Who does that? So this continued year after year, and what I noticed was I had people come back to the office and then they would tell their story of what they did. And I noticed that their reactions, their faces were flushed. They were smiling. They had tears of joy. We'd had to stock up on the Kleenex every year. They were having the helper's high. They were experiencing that adrenaline and that euphoria that comes with these random acts of kindness. And so what I'm going to ask you to do is to try this yourself. In our world today, where we are so polarized and we are so divided based on who we are in these certain silos, that the only way we can break this down is to try to engage with others. So I'm going to ask you to even try it today when you leave. When you are staring at your phone, look up and gander at the people around you. The person on the elevator, say good morning to them. When you're in the parking lot, say hello. Those are simple, free things. And then maybe what happens is that you can start doing this, and we've learned that compassion can be learned, and that with practice, you can do this day after day. It becomes a habit. And imagine what a city, a town, a community would be like if everyone acted in this way. Imagine how we could look at the problems of homelessness and hunger and loneliness. And imagine if we use that lens of compassion, how we could change these problems. And then even as a community, if we look beyond our country and our borders, if we looked at the migrant and refugee crisis and with a lens of compassion, what if we did this together? The reality is, Gander is not just a story, and it's not just a musical. It's a real place, and it could be in your town. And it starts with you. So go out and go do it.